Raider Nation, what's good? Jesse Merrick here. Thanks for tuning in for another episode of the Silver and Black Sports Network podcast. Today was an interesting practice. So we do have a whole lot of things that we got to talk about. For starters, Jackson Powers-Johnson was at guard today. We'll dive into that and what the starting O-line actually looked like today. And we're also going to be hitting heavily on the battle at cornerback. That is a real interesting competition that we've got going on there. Eric Stokes really seems to have locked down the one spot. I'll tell you who's in the mix and leading the way for that spot opposite him. Plus, we got to talk about Trey Tucker. Let me tell you guys, this dude just continues to impress me. He really has taken hold of that number 2 receiver spot for the Raiders. And we'll also mix in some talk about the tight ends. We know you guys love Brock. They were heavily involved today. Michael Mayer, another guy that's going to be making an appearance. But JT Woods, he really caught my eye as well today. And Jack Besh just continues to play solid ball. So with that, let's get the podcast rolling. I want to hit on the corners first because coming into camp, that was probably the biggest battle on my radar personally, and probably a lot of people as well. It looked like a thin group. But man, let me tell you guys, so far, Eric Stokes has looked pretty solid in that role. At 26 years old, surprisingly, he's the veteran in that group. He even laughed and said that feels kind of crazy to be the vet at just 26 years old. But he does fit kind of what the Raiders are looking for in terms of the coaching staff. He comes in about 6 feet tall, ran a 4.29. The size looks good. He's obviously a willing tackler as well. That's something that's shown up since they've thrown the pads on. Overall, I have been impressed with him. Coverage-wise, look, his grades were average last year, but I think he's played better than that so far with the Raiders. He did only allow 3 touchdowns, didn't have any interceptions. Obviously, that needs to change because this Raiders defense had trouble turning the ball over. They only had 10 interceptions last year, which was bottom 10 in the league in that category, and they were actually 4th worst overall with only 13 total turnovers. So this is going to get kind of interesting now to see if this cornerback group can help kind of turn that around in that regard in terms of turning the ball over. Now, DCAM and Darian Porter, the two of them seem to be in the lead for that spot opposite of Eric Stokes. They've been mostly trading reps with the ones, mixing in here and there on the twos as well. And Jacorian Bennett, surprisingly to me and many others before we entered camp, he's actually worked with the ones, the twos, and the threes. So this guy has been all over the place. We'll get to him in a bit, but first, we're going to start with DCAM because he's actually gotten the bulk of the work with the ones recently. Also, too, he's Devin White's cousin. I don't know if you guys knew that, but that's an interesting storyline. Him and Devin are tight. They drive to the facility every day together, eating every single meal together. So I think that's awesome to have a guy like him in his corner. And again, being related, that's just obviously a tighter bond there. But man, he has played really well thus far in camp. As I noted, he's had a couple of, solid days. And since then, really starting getting, a lot more reps with the ones. Today worked predominantly with the ones. And look, this is a guy that from week 11 on last year really started to get a lot more usage. And let's be honest, the coverage grades, they were bad. 42.2 coverage grade from PFF. Not the greatest, but it is worth noting that the guy was a rookie then. The jump from year 1 to year 2, especially for a corner, is very wide. Jacorian Bennett actually talked about today, said that he kind of sees that from DCAM, that he's going through that same process because it does take time. Corner is a really tough position. You have to have such a short memory in the league. So he's learning that. I think so far he does look like a guy that's going to be able to come in and make that leap, and so far has looked the part throughout camp. Been really impressed with him. He does have the frame, which again fits this staff's mold. I feel like we're going to be saying that so much about all these corners and the DBs as a whole, because it's very clear that Pete Carroll has a type. It's those long, rangy corners. Everybody knows it. It's so cliche to talk about it. We get it, the Legion of Boom, everything, but it has been so apparent since he's arrived here, and it's very clear he favors those guys. So that's why guys like him, when they make plays, continue to get work. As I noted, ever since making those plays, he came down with a big pass breakup on Dante Thornton a couple days ago at practice in a red zone period. Even picked Geno Smith off the next day. I believe that was the first day in pads in the red zone as well. And again, since then, has been getting a whole lot of reps. And today, he didn't really pop to me, but it was also nothing glaring. A lot of the times when I think about these corners and talk about a lot of them, I'll sit there and I'll think okay, what did they do today? Well, I didn't really notice them today. That's usually a good thing if you're not noticing the corners a ton. Obviously, you want to see them turn the ball over, pass breakups, all those things. But if you're not constantly seeing them running, obviously away from you, then that's probably a good thing. So I've been impressed with what I've seen from him thus far. And then obviously Darian Porter, he comes in, and this guy seemingly has set the world on fire since he's joined the Raiders. He has been the talk of the town in that cornerback room. Again, the frame, you guys are going to get so tired of hearing me talk about it, but listed at 6'2" on the roster. I've seen some people list him as 6'4", and honestly, it's believable. He looks like he could be 6'4". He is so tall and lean and lanky, but man, the guy's obviously got the size. So it's been interesting to see him and what his movement has been like at that size. He's obviously got that. The athleticism 100% has been there. Ran a 4.3 at the combine, 36.5-inch vertical, a 10-foot 11-inch broad jump. Like, those are the type of numbers that a guy like Tariq Woolen put up, and he started drawing comparisons to him. And obviously there's a connection there with the Seahawks and Pete and all that stuff. So like, it's an easy comp, but like, the kid has that kind of athleticism, and the athleticism has translated onto the field. That has been really easy to see through his time here with the Raiders. Like, kid is an athlete all around, and is just real smooth and fluid. And it looks effortless when he's out there running, and he actually did come away with a pick in one-on-ones guarding Tommy Millott on a fade. Did a really great job kind of staying on top of him, and then he just out-rebounded him, really. And again, Tommy is only 5'11", so there's an obvious size mismatch there, but still a really great rep. And honestly, it's indicative of kind of his game and who he is as a player. At Iowa State, he was actually one of the best deep ball cover guys in college football. According to PFF, he only allowed one open look on balls thrown 20-plus yards down the field, and actually came away with 2 picks in those situations. He was tested like that about like 7 times. So he's played well in those deep ball situations. Obviously, again, the size, the length, everything, not a dude that you want to test a ton like that, and has looked solid in those situations. Now, Darian has gotten a ton of work with the ones, really right from the jump. He even said today that at first he was a bit intimidated by that, but ever since then, he's really embraced it, and you can see that out on the field. Like, kid looks comfortable. He's continuing to learn it, which is also just very impressive for a guy who was not a full-time starter till the 2024 season, which was his 5th year of college football. So, like, kid has played a lot of ball, just has not actually started a ton. Really prior to that, he was just a special teams ace and blocked like 4 punts, had a field goal block as well over the years. Special teams coordinator for the Raiders, Tom McMahon, is also a big fan of him because his special team snaps are like so high. I forget what the exact number is, but it was like through the roof. And I remember Tom brought that up, and we were all sitting back there thinking like, man, that's crazy to hear that, especially for a guy drafted, because a lot of these guys, they're the top players on their team, and most of them don't play a ton of special teams. Obviously, that's starting to change because guys realize that's going to be their path to playing time in the league. But this is a guy who has had so much work on special teams, and it's very clear he's going to be an asset for the Raiders in that aspect of the game, but also looks like he's going to be a starter, or at least is in the mix to be one of those guys, and the staff loves him. And again, Pete has said many, many times that he is not afraid to play those young guys. So he's come in and looked the part. And also, it is worth noting that this guy was a former receiver, so he's still young in the position. So, like, all these things, and again, like, we're not trying to sit here and act like he is Tariq Woolen or anything like that. Like, it's still early. We've only seen him go against the Raiders. We haven't seen him in the preseason, regular season, none of that stuff. And I've had a conversation with somebody about that recently. So I just want to reiterate the fact that, like, this is the preseason. This is the time for positivity. You're going to hear me and a lot of other media members talking very positively about this team, because that's what happens this time of year. You see a lot of these guys out on the practice field, and most of them are going to play very well in practice. So let's just be positive until we have a reason not to be positive. You know what I mean? I'm generally a positive guy, so you're going to see most of that from me. But when it's time to call people out and, say when things haven't been great, like, I'll 100% be there to do that. But now is the time to highlight a lot of the positives, and he has definitely been one for the Raiders. But sticking in that cornerback room, something that's kind of confused me, I think, and a lot of other people on this Raiders team, has been Jacorian Bennett. He has taken reps all over the place. He's gone with the ones, he's gone with the twos, he's gone with the threes. It's been crazy. Day in and day out, you just really don't know where he's going to line up. And to me, I've said it before here on the pod, it sounds like he's on the outside looking in, which is crazy, but he says he's not shying away from the competition in that aspect of it. After talking to him today, I came away really impressed. And I have been every time that we've talked to Jacorian. Like, he always does say the right things and seem like a kid who's very, sure of himself and knows where his weaknesses are. He talked a lot today about the fact that, like, he's got the athleticism and all those things, and he's got the speed. He said that he will beat anybody on this team in a foot race. But he said he's also really trying to hone in on the technique and the details, because he doesn't want to turn, like, every single rep into a track meet. You know what I mean? Like, this is a guy that has all the athleticism you could possibly want. Obviously, doesn't have the buzzword frame that a lot of the other guys in this room have, but he's a freaky athlete, and it's very clear to see. He's also realizing and learning that, like, he needs to hone in that technique so that he doesn't turn it into a track meet, because it's not always going to be that out there. And I thought that was really introspective of him and mature to, like, realize that and, like, speak about it honestly and upfront. I thought it was pretty cool. But overall, last year too, me and a lot of you guys in Raider Nation, I think, were impressed with him last year too. I mean, every time I do mention him when we're at practice, I get so many people saying, like, why is our best corner not getting a look, and so many things like that. And look, I think before we started watching practice, before, you know, the Raiders got Eric Stokes and all of these things, he probably was the best corner in that room. Since then, it hasn't really looked like it. But again, just like I said before with Stokes and DCAM and them, like, I haven't seen a lot of bad from him. I will say that. I think that he is just suffering from a situation partially where the size and, as he noted, maybe the technique isn't quite there. Like, Pete coaches these corners very, very hard. Every single one of them that we talked to so far has mentioned that. Like, we know Pete is a defensive coach. We know Pete loves to coach up his DBs. He's always got the gloves on. He's ready to go. And he's always very hands-on with that group. So there's something there that isn't quite fitting in with what they want. Obviously, again, like I've said, the frame probably plays a factor in that. But Jacorian Bennett, to me, is one of the most interesting cases on this team throughout camp so far, just because of the way things have kind of panned out with his usage and all that. Because last year, again, like I said, I was impressed, and I think many other media members were as well. You know, his coverage grades, they were average. Like, I get it. But at the same time, his second season, he really started to take a leap. You know, he had 7 pass breakups, which ranked 22nd among corners in the league. Like, not bad at all. And he was actually trending up until he hurt his shoulder. He battled through it for a couple weeks and tried to keep going, but eventually he had to call it quits after week 11. So it's like, what are you going to do? You know, he's a young guy clawing and scratching, trying to do whatever he can to get out on the field, but finally has to tap out because at the end of the day, like, longevity, you got to think about that. And so now he's in a weird situation where he probably isn't going to be getting a ton of playing time, at least the way that the share of reps have gone. And I understand, like, it's early. That's very important to note. But I think, like, one thing we need to take into account that is, like, even though it's early, and I've had this conversation with a handful of other people at practice and media members and things like that, it kind of feels like the Raiders are moving fast. Like, I think Pete and this staff and Spytech and all of them got a pretty good read on this team in the offseason, minicamp. They went back and looked at film, all those things. And I think they made up their mind on a lot of guys. And so it looks like they've slotted in many spots. Like, there are a few spots of intrigue, which we'll be talking about here on the podcast, and many different areas. But for the most part, it's not like it's, even though they preach competition everywhere, and there is that, it's not like there's a ton of spots up for grabs. I think we're pretty much set for the Raiders in a lot of positions, although corner, again, opposite of Stokes, seems to be an area where it's not quite settled. But again, Jacorian, to me, seems like he's on the outside looking in. Still a long way to go. They haven't even played their first preseason game, which will be next Thursday. Obviously, again, too, there's football tonight, guys. That's pretty crazy. The Hall of Fame game, I can't believe it's already come. But I'm fired up for that, which is crazy because it is preseason football. But I think we're all ready to see some football, no matter who it is that's actually playing. But anyway, we'll see how that cornerback battle goes. We're going to be keeping tabs on that, obviously, throughout the rest of the preseason and probably into the season, too, because it may shuffle around a bit. But another area where we do need to touch on, and we talked about it in the last podcast, the offensive line. Now, we'll get to the brewing battle at center in a second, but first, we do have to talk about Kolton Miller. We got to give a shout out to him. He gets the 3-year, $66 million in new money, the extension there for the Raiders. Look, you have to be happy for a guy like Kolton. He's come in. He's always, like, gone to work. You know, even in the offseason, he said, he's like, you know, I'm not going to hold out. Like, I'm going to come in. I'm going to show up. I'm going to work, and I'm going to lead and be that guy, you know? And he was that guy, and he got rewarded for that. And according to Ian Rappaport, they're actually talking to Jacoby Myers, who's another guy who just comes in and works. And it's no doubt that he also deserves to get paid. And I think that's something that we need to touch on here, is that this staff has done a really good job of paying, like, the quality team guys. Obviously, they come and extend Max Crosby. They trade for Geno. They extend him. AJ Cole, best punter in the league. I don't think that's really up for debate. He gets extended. Adam Butler, one of the most underrated nose tackles, I personally think, in the league. Like, he has played really well. Max also seems to think that. I've really liked his game since I've been covering the team and been really impressed with it. And I one thing I will say as an aside about Adam Butler, he called his shot, like, I think it was the beginning of last season, maybe a year before or something like that. And he basically said, like, he just got pissed off about his situation. You know what I mean? Like, he was tired of being that guy that everyone would say, hey, like, you know, what he does doesn't show up in the stat sheet and all those things. Well, then he comes out and had a really good season and has flashed in a lot of different ways for the Raiders, and is one of those guys that's, like, always there in the run game, has been in the backfield a lot. You know, I think anybody that really watches the game and, like, diagnoses it knows that Adam Butler needs his flowers. And so, like, that's a guy I've been fired up for him, just because, you know, over the years, like, you talk to these guys and you get to see kind of where they're at. And it was very clear, and he was vulnerable about the fact that, like, he wasn't happy with his situation and he wanted to improve his position and standing in the league and also his paycheck too. And he did that. So, like, I always think no matter who you are, like, if you go out, you call your shot and you make that happen, like, kudos to you. So got a lot of respect for that dude. And I'm interested to see what he does for this team. And obviously they're going to need him because now there is an opening at 3 technique next to him. So he's going to have to step up as they bring in a young guy in that position. And just as an aside, before we finish up and wrap up this whole extending their guys thing, I didn't catch this, but at practice, another media member alerted me to the fact that Tyree Wilson got hurt. I don't know how serious it was. He was out for like a second, apparently didn't return. So we'll be keeping an eye on that as we go back to practice tomorrow and see if he's back in there. Obviously, he's a guy that was in the rotation along the defensive line at that 3 technique spot. He's played outside as well. You don't want to lose anybody. Again, not sure if it's serious or not. It was something I found out after practice. So we'll check back in up on that, see if he's back at practice tomorrow. But anyway, back to the whole thing about, like, taking care of their guys. We noted Adam Butler. Another dude they took care of, Isaiah Polamalu, the safety, who really seems like he's coming in and now going to step into that role left by Marcus Epps. I mean, he filled those shoes very well. He's a guy that I think a lot of us have noticed over the years at practice, and he's finally getting that shot to, like, be the guy, the unquestioned guy back there. And he's got a lot of help around him with a guy like Jeremy Chin and some other vets that they brought in on defense. So he's a guy I'm real curious to see how he looks now in his second really full season, but like second season, because he played a lot last year. Second season as a full-time starter. It's going to be real interesting to watch. But the O-line, we talk about Kolton Miller. Big development today. We noted the fact that it seems to be a full-blown competition going on at center for the Raiders. We saw Jackson Powers-Johnson and Jordan Meredith trading reps on days with the ones. You know, so one day Jackson Powers-Johnson would be working with the ones. The next day Jordan Meredith would be working with the ones. And then the other guy would be working with the twos predominantly for the day. So it was like, at first we were like, maybe not a huge deal. Well, Pete told us, like, it is a competition. It's for real. It's happening. And Adam Butler had some interesting comments about Jackson Powers-Johnson and his thoughts about what he could be. We dove into that on the podcast yesterday, and he said that, 2 days ago, that is, he said that he thought Jackson Powers-Johnson could be an all-pro guard at some point. Obviously, lofty expectations. Jackson Powers-Johnson was drafted as a guard. So, well, today, he's lined up at guard with the first team to the right of Jordan Meredith, who was working with the first team at center. And he actually took Alex Kappa's place. So that's interesting for a couple reasons. Obviously, because it seems like now the staff is sitting back thinking, hey, we like Jackson Powers-Johnson as a center, but maybe we can get by, and we also happen to like what Jordan Meredith brings to the table as a center. He's a little more veteran of a player as well. And then you bump Jackson Powers-Johnson to the right, and maybe they think he could be an all-pro guard at that point. Maybe they agree with Adam Butler. Maybe they've taken into account what he said. But the weird thing is now that's taking a spot away from Alex Kappa, who you just gave a 2-year, $11 million deal to. That's 17th highest among right guards. So not the greatest thing in terms of, like, team building and stuff like that and use of the salary cap, obviously, but you want to fill out your O-line with the best possible players. And so basically what it looked like today for that first team O-line, obviously Kolton Miller at left tackle, Dylan Parham at left guard. We had Jordan Meredith at center, Jackson Powers-Johnson at right guard, and then DJ Glaze at right tackle. So Really interesting combo there. I kind of like it. Like, look, if they're really high on Jordan Meredith, and we dove into it on the podcast, we also dove into it in the most recent newsletter as well, that Jordan Meredith graded out pretty high, according to PFF, and looked pretty good, in the run blocking category, and just overall, got good grades overall. So he's a guy that now we're going to be watching going forward, see how it goes, see if him and Gino can really develop that chemistry that it was clear he and Jackson Powers-Johnson had, and how much this will stick. Maybe it'll be one of those things where, okay, this is the O-line that they want to go with, but they maybe tinker with where the guys actually line up. So maybe Jackson Powers-Johnson goes back to center for the next day of practice on Friday, and maybe Jordan goes back to guard. Who knows? It's going to be interesting. But either way, like, that versatility is really big to have along the offensive line, and it's going to be very interesting to watch. So with that, guys, let's get to some of our other takeaways from practice today, that being Thursday, their first day back after a bit of a break. I mentioned early on in the open that the tight ends were heavily involved. Brock Bowers and Michael Mayer in particular, those guys got a lot of work in 7-on, in team, especially in the red zone, and they move around a ton. We've talked about the whole, positionless player thing that Chip Kelly talked about. Mayer made some real acrobatic catches. His athleticism was really on display. He's been a guy that the coaching staff has talked up a lot. And I think he's really going to be a monster in the blocking game as well this year. We've seen him used that way. He is a big body. Going to be a scary dude in the run game for sure. And I think Chip has a lot of things in store for the tight ends. We'll just say that. It's going to be really fun to watch how he utilizes them. We know Chip has a great offensive mind. We've seen it, so many years. The way he's going to use those guys is going to be real interesting. I don't know how much they're going to give away in the preseason games. Probably not a lot. It's probably going to be pretty vanilla. But the usage of them has been real interesting to watch. And I do like the dynamic that both Brock and Michael Mayer bring to the table. And again, I've mentioned on the podcast, I'm really high on Ian Thomas as well. Another big-bodied dude who can do a whole lot, and I think is also going to be involved. I think they're going to be using the three of them a pretty decent amount. And one of those things that, like, we've talked about is I'm real curious to see how the roster construction is going to look like come camp time. I bet you wouldn't be shocked if they keep 4 tight ends just because there's so much utilization with those guys. And they're usually pretty good on special teams too. Like, I don't think Brock's going to be used on special teams, but you go and look at Ian Thomas, you look at Michael Mayer, and then whoever that 4th tight end ends up being, if they end up keeping the 4 of them, there's going to be a lot of usage from those guys on special teams because they're very valuable. Tom McMahon has talked about those bigger bodied, and athletic guys, what they can provide. And he's mentioned it too with Jack Besh, who we'll get to in a bit here because, again, he continues to impress me. But their corner, JT Woods, he's another guy that Pete has talked about since they brought him in here. He spoke glowingly of him. I believe it was for Tuesday when we spoke to him. My days have melded together, guys. When you're launching a new business, you're obviously not getting a lot of sleep. So sometimes the days start to meld together. So forgive me if I get those wrong at times. But anyway, JT Woods, he has been impressive at times. He's gotten work all up and down the lineup as well, similar to, a Jacorian Bennett type of guy. I think JT will eventually be more of a depth guy, but another dude who comes in who's actually has been a safety, 6'2", 195. He's got the ranginess, all that stuff. But man, today he caught my eye. My former coworker, Brian Salmon, shout out over at Channel 3. That's my guy right there. We were both talking as we were watching when we were like, man, like JT Woods is playing physical, like he was hitting people today. Like it was interesting and fun to watch because that type of physicality, you really enjoy seeing that, especially out of a corner. Like, it is football at the end of the day. You want to see people hit. And, for a guy that's usually a safety, I thought he's looked pretty good as a corner, and he's brought that physicality that you see at the corner position to his play he's brought the physicality you see at the safety position and brought it to the table as a corner. It's been interesting, to watch thus far. And another dude we got to give a shout out to, Greedy Vance. I forget who it was today. I think it was Jacorian. It was either Jacorian or Darian. One of the guys said, like, Greedy Vance has played real greedy, and it's true. He has. Like, he's flashed a couple times. Again, probably another depth guy if he does make the roster, but Greedy has popped at times. You go through my notebook and I've seen a few notes of Greedy Vance making plays. So just something to throw in there. But and I know we talk about receivers a lot, so I hope some of you guys don't get frustrated with me. Again, being a former receiver, like, That's where my heart's at. So I watch a lot of those guys. But Trey Tucker, man, I mean, this guy has impressed me. He really looks like he's locked down that starting spot. You know, when they go to 11 personnel, so again, that's the three tight ends, three receivers, one tight end, one running back. That's the 11 personnel there. So when they go to that look has always been Jacoby, Trey Tucker, and for the most part, Dante Thornton. I think Dante has locked down that spot. So that's pretty much what it's looked like. But I think Trey Tucker has taken that step and shown this staff that he's going to be that guy, which is huge. He's a speedster. He has been a crazy tough cover in one-on-ones when we've watched. And he looks like a guy that's taken that next step. I think over the years, and I know we're talking about a lot of guys that look like they're making the next step, but again, positivity, that's what this time of year is all about. But with Trey Tucker, it's always been kind of like a double clutched situation where he goes to catch. I noticed that a lot, his first couple of years in the league. He in a lot of those, I think there's one game in particular, I can't remember who it was against, but I remember, he went bam, and it's like going off of his face and everything. And we have seen those double clutches on the deep balls when he's trying to track it into his hands. We don't see that now. I haven't noticed it. God, I hate saying I haven't noticed it once, but I haven't seen it. It hasn't shown up to me in camp thus far. He's been making clean catches, and that is massive, obviously, for a receiver. But for him to be able to kind of erase that from his game, I think that's going to help him take a big step because at times his game suffered from that. So been really impressed with Trey Tucker and what he's done throughout camp so far. He's another guy, I don't think he gets credit for the physicality that he plays with. He was a former wrestler. I remember talking with him last year about that. And so he brings that element to of his game to the NFL. And, it's been fun to kind of watch him mature and grow and now take hold of one of the starting spots of receivers. So he's going to be a fun guy to watch, when they let him get out there and kind of do his thing. Another guy I've talked about a lot, Jack Besh. Yeah, he keeps making plays, so we got to keep talking about him. In one-on-ones, he made a real nice play on a fade ball when JT Woods was in coverage. It was in one-on-ones. He beat him, kind of stacked him a bit, and then hit him with a little chicken wing. If you guys know what that is, if you extend that arm when you beat a guy, the referees are usually going to throw a flag, offensive PI. But the move, the veteran move, or the smart move, I guess in his case, because he's not a vet, is to hit him with a little bit of that chicken wing, to create that space. And he did it, and then he just tracked the ball so well into his hands down on the sideline. Was really impressed with that particular play. The concentration was definitely on point. And another guy that I find myself talking about more and more is Zamir White. Not a guy that I expected to be talking about a lot. I'll be honest. I kind of just thought, I was like, all right, they got Ashton Genty. They go in and bring Raheem Mostert in, and what we had seen from Sincere McCormick till he got hurt, I kind of thought that we had seen the last of Zamir White, but now I'm thinking not so fast. The guy has looked good. He looks like he's dropped some weight. He's making plays. He's agile. He's physical. Pete talked about him being, the strongest guy in that running back room. Strength, purely strength, strongest guy in that sense. Interesting development there. Because again, not one that I expected. Not that to say I wrote him off, but I think many of us probably didn't expect a whole lot from him. And he has looked like to come back and almost saying hey, not so fast, maybe to steal a line from Gino, he just hasn't written back or whatever. But we'll see how that develops for him. I think he's the guy that'll get his carries in the preseason, and I'm real curious to see what that looks like. And Pete actually liked him when he was coming out of Georgia as well. They scouted him. So there's a background there on him, and it's very clear they do have somewhat of a plan for him. And again, we talked about the running back room a lot, and I don't want to get into a habit of repeating a lot of things, but just another thing to hammer home for those of you guys that haven't been around or haven't watched the first two podcasts. I guess we haven't been around a ton, right? But you guys didn't catch those first two maybe. This is a very deep running back room. I think they're going to end up keeping a lot of guys. Pete likes a lot of them. At some point, the math is going to have to math, and they're going to have to make those decisions. But I do think at the end of the day, obviously, it's going to be Genty. I think Raheem Mostert sticks. He's still out as his family and his wife had a baby, so that's going to be really cool for him to be able to be with his family during that time. But I think he obviously sticks. They like him. And then, again, Zamir. And I do think Sincere McCormick carves out a role for himself on this active roster. He does so much on special teams and has really popped and been shifty, and Pete talked about him. So it's clear that he's caught Pete's eye as well. So the running back room is going to be interesting. some real tough decisions to make. But I think it's going to be those 4 that end up making the active roster for them. But anyway, guys, that's going to do it for our show today. We will be back out there at practice on Friday, so make sure you keep an eye out for our next podcast after that. It does sound like we'll have our first guest on the show. Yeah, our first guest. I will make sure I say this before I tell you who it's going to be. We're still kind of working on the format of the show. There's going to be some days where it's just me talking head with no sound bites and just me giving you my take on practice. Because we are doing podcasts after every single practice, some of them will be longer, some will be shorter. Maybe there's not a ton of takeaways from practice. Sometimes there's just like boring practices that are low event. Today obviously wasn't the case. So the format of the show will change from time to time. We're going to move things around. And I think when the season rolls around, we'll get into a bit of a normal cadence. But we're going to try and get our first guest on for you tomorrow. It does sound like we're going to be able to make it happen. Former Raiders linebacker and new radio analyst for the team, Kirk Morrison. I am actually really pumped to get a chance to pick his brain on the podcast. Obviously, anytime you get to talk to a former player like that view and the history of the game and having been there and done that, like, it's irreplaceable. You can't get that anywhere else. So, like, I can't wait to get his take on it and to talk to him just about getting the new gig, like having played for the Raiders, like, that's just really cool to have the guy on the radio. I loved Lincoln. Lincoln was always great to me, but I'm stoked to see Kirk step into that role. He's going to be working with our buddy Jason Horowitz, who we're going to have on the podcast very soon. Yeah, really excited to talk to Kirk. I hope that does work out. And again, it sounds like it's going to, so we'll hopefully get him on the show. But again, guys, thank you for watching. If you're not already subscribed to our newsletter, make sure you head to silverandblacksportsnetwork.com and do subscribe to that to get that delivered right to your inbox every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 6 a.m. It's good stuff. I promise you're going to like what you see. We put a lot of work into that. Also, please do like and subscribe to this podcast wherever you are listening to us. And if you liked what you heard, this is important, guys. Please hit us with a 5-star review and leave some comments as well. You really have no idea how much that helps in terms of the growth, of this show, of our brand. And it takes about 2 seconds to do. So the comments, they do have already been so great, and we are so appreciative of that. I do read them. You guys are freaking awesome. It's been so cool. So please keep that coming. The support honestly means so much. And again, I'll keep saying it, guys. Tell your friends about us, because sharing is caring. We want to make this thing grow. And I'm going to keep saying this as well. We are trying to grow the brand, because I want to make this the best Raiders podcast that you guys have access to, the best one in the game. I'm just going to speak it into existence until it actually happens. And with your guys' help, we can make that happen. So again, guys, thanks for tuning into the podcast. As always, we love it when you listen, when you watch, when you comment, all that stuff. And we'll catch you after practice tomorrow.